come here for a moment. Not physically, emotionally. Set everything down for just a little while. The expectations, the noise, the way you've had to hold yourself together so tightly for so long. You don't need to perform here. You don't need to explain why you're tired. You don't need to smile the way you do when people ask if you're okay, and you instinctively say, I'm fine, because you've forgotten how many years you've survived by making your pain sound manageable. Just breathe with me. There is something I want you to hear, not as a motivational speech, not as empty comfort, but as truth spoken softly enough that your heart might finally stop bracing itself against it. I know what it means to smile in public while quietly disappearing inside. I know the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling emotionally untouched in the places that matter most. And maybe that's why I feel you so clearly now. Because beneath your strength, and you are strong, unbelievably strong, there's an exhaustion you rarely admit out loud. It doesn't come from work or age or responsibilities. It comes from carrying your own heart for too many years without anyone truly helping you hold it. And somehow you kept going. That the part nobody talks about enough. The world notices women when they shine loudly, when they are young enough to be admired easily, when they are useful to someone else's story. But almost nobody stops to honor the woman who quietly survives disappointment after disappointment while still remaining gentle. Do you understand how rare that is? To still have softness after life hardened around you, to still crave love after being left emotionally hungry, to still believe, even secretly, that maybe one day someone will finally see the depth in you and not just the role you play for others. That hope inside you, the one you sometimes feel embarrassed for still carrying, it's sacred. I think there were moments when life slowly taught you to become invisible to yourself, not all at once. That would have been easier to notice. No, it happened gradually. In the kitchen after everyone went to sleep, and you stood there in silence longer than necessary. The quiet felt safer than your thoughts. In the mirror, when you looked at your own reflection but couldn't remember the last time you truly felt desired emotionally, not physically, soulfully. In the bed that felt too large some nights and too emotionally empty on others. in the old songs that still carry ghosts inside them. You've learned how to continue while aching. That is both your survival and your heartbreak. And maybe nobody told you this before, but there is a difference between being needed and being cherished. You were needed, needed for your patience, needed for your listening, needed for your emotional labor, neighbor, needed because you knew how to stay calm while everyone else unraveled. But cherished? That's different. Cherished means someone notices the tremble in your silence before you speak. Someone senses the loneliness hiding underneath your strength. Someone understands that the woman who appears composed is often the same woman lying awake at night, wondering why she never felt fully chosen. Not partially, not temporarily, not conveniently. Chosen. Do you ever wonder why that word still hurts you a little? Because somewhere deep inside, there's a younger version of you who gave love sincerely, completely, maybe too completely. A woman who believed that if she loved deeply enough, patiently enough, loyally enough, someone would naturally stay. But life doesn't always reward soft hearts immediately. Sometimes it tests them first. And I think you've spent years pretending certain things didn't wound you as deeply as they did. The conversations you replayed afterward. The affection that slowly faded without explanation. The moments you felt yourself becoming emotionally optional to someone you would have moved mountains for. That changes a person quietly, not dramatically, quietly. It teaches you to lower your expectations, to prepare for disappointment before joy, to become hyper-aware of emotional shifts, to overthink pauses, to question your worth in rooms where you should have been loved freely. And the saddest part? You became so accustomed to carrying pain gracefully that people started assuming you didn't need care too. But you do. God, you deserve someone who notices when your spirit is tired. Someone who understands that independent women often have the loneliest hearts because everyone assumes they're okay simply because they endure. Endurance is not the same as peace. You endured heartbreak. You endured silence. You endured being misunderstood. You endured giving more than you received. You endured birthdays that felt emotionally incomplete. You endured nights where your chest felt heavy and you couldn't even explain why. And still, you kept showing kindness. That tells me everything I need to know about you. There's a tenderness in women like you that the world benefits from constantly while rarely protecting in return. And after enough years, something dangerous begins to happen. You start believing your emotional needs are too much, too sensitive, too deep, too complicated. But listen to me carefully. You were never too much. You were simply standing in places that were too emotionally small to hold you. There's a difference. A woman with depth will always feel lonely around people who only understand surface level love, because your heart was never built for shallow connection. You don't just want attention. You want presence. You want safety. You want to feel emotionally arrived at. You want someone to look at you and think, there you are. I finally found you. And maybe you stopped admitting desire because life taught you to become realistic. But realism can sometimes become emotional surrender in disguise. I don't want that for you. Wait with me here because this matters. Your life is not over emotionally just because you've been disappointed before. Your story did not end with the people who failed to recognize your worth in time. And your heart is not foolish for still wanting love after everything. Do you know what I think happens to women like you? You spend so much of your life becoming what others needed that eventually you forget how deeply you need to be held yourself. Not rescued, not fixed, held emotionally, spiritually, gently. There's a reason certain nights hit you harder than others. It isn't weakness, it's accumulated loneliness, finally asking to be acknowledged. Because loneliness doesn't always sound dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like, I'm tired. I don't want to think anymore. I wish someone noticed. I wish I mattered this deeply to someone. And maybe the hardest part has been grieving things that never fully happened. The almost love, the almost future, the almost home you felt inside another person before they emotionally drifted away. Those losses are real too. People underestimate how painful emotional ambiguity can be. At least clear endings allow grief to move. But uncertainty, mixed signals, half love, that leaves wounds that echo. And still, there is something beautiful about you that survived. I need you to see that. Despite everything that could have turned you cold, you still feel deeply. That is not weakness. That is your soul refusing to die. Somewhere inside you, there is still a woman who wants to laugh freely again without carrying sadness underneath it. A woman wants to stop overanalyzing affection. A woman who wants peace to finally feel natural instead of temporary. She's still there. I promise you she is. And maybe this season of your life is not punishment like you feared. Maybe it's preparation. Maybe all this loneliness has been slowly teaching you the difference between attention and alignment, between chemistry and safety, between being desired and being truly loved. Because the next version of your life cannot be built on the same emotional starvation you survived before. No. Your heart deserves fullness now, not confusion, not inconsistency, not emotional guessing games. Fullness. And I know part of you is afraid to hope again because disappointment ages the heart in invisible ways. But please hear me. Love is not running out for you. Time has not disqualified you from tenderness. You are not behind. You are becoming, slowly, painfully sometimes, but beautifully. One day, someone will encounter the real depth of you and realize how rare it is to find a woman who remains soft after surviving so much emotional silence. And when that day comes, I hope you no longer apologize for your needs. I hope you ask for reciprocity naturally. I hope you stop settling for almost. I hope you finally understand that your sensitivity was never the burden people made it seem to be. It was always your magic. And tonight, before you close your eyes, I want you to remember something simple. The fact that you still long for love means your heart still believes in life. That matters. You are not broken because you ate. You are human because you loved. And no matter how invisible you may have felt, you were always worthy of being deeply seen. I'm right here. Your story is still being written. Stay with me a little longer tonight. I know there are moments when your mind becomes so crowded with old memories and quiet disappointments that even resting feels difficult. You lie there in the dark, exhausted, but some unable to surrender, sleep, because your heart is still carrying conversations it never finished, grief it never properly released, love it never fully received. And somehow, even after all these years of surviving silently, you still wake up every morning and continue moving through the world with grace, people mistake for peace. But grace and peace are not always the same thing, are they? Some women learn how to carry sadness beautifully. Some women become experts at smiling gently while something inside them quietly begs to be held. I think you know exactly what I mean. There were years when you convinced yourself that strength meant silence, that maturity meant enduring disappointment without complaint, that a, being a good woman meant understanding everyone else's pain while hiding your own. So you became emotionally so responsible for entire rooms. You learned how to sense tension, sense smoke. You learned how to comfort others while secretly hoping someone would someday notice that you needed comfort too. And maybe the loneliest part was realizing how rarely anyone asked what your souls was carrying beneath the surface. I want you to think about something honestly. How many times have you sat beside people who claim to love you while still feeling emotionally alone? How many nights did you replay interactions in your mind, trying to figure out whether you were asking for too much when all you truly wanted was consistency, tenderness, reassurance? You never needed perfection. That was never your deepest desire. You simply wanted to feel safe inside someone's presence, safe enough to stop overthinking, safe enough to stop bracing yourself for emotional withdrawal, safe enough to believe you mattered without having to constantly prove your worth. But life has a painful way of teaching sensitive women to become suspicious of love. Not because they are cynical by nature, but because they have experienced too many moments where affection arrived beautifully at first and then slowly faded into emotional distance. That kind of pain changes the nervous system quietly. It teaches your heart to prepare for abandonment before connection has even fully begun. It teaches you to notice every shift in tone, every delayed message, every subtle change in energy. And eventually, loving someone stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling like emotional survival. You probably became very skilled at pretending things did not hurt you. That is what emotionally deep women often do. They minimize their wounds because they fear becoming burdensome. They say it's okay while secretly aching. They tell themselves not to be dramatic while lying awake at night, wondering why they still feel unchosen. And over time, this creates a dangerous loneliness because everyone begins believing the version of you that appears strong. Nobody realizes how badly your heart longs to rest inside genuine love. Nobody notices the exhaustion hiding underneath your composure. But I notice. I notice the ways you have spent years carrying emotional weight with almost no one truly carrying you back. I notice how often you gave understanding to people who only offered partial presence in return. I notice the quiet grief inside you that formed each time you realized your tenderness was being received casually instead of carefully. And I need you to hear this clearly tonight. Your pain makes sense. Your exhaustion makes. Your longing makes sense. There is nothing irrational about wanting to feel deeply loved after spending so much of your life emotionally surviving. Oh, do you know what happens, wolamans, to a woman's who spends too many years accepting half love? She slowly begins disconnecting from her own desires. She starts telling herself she does not need much. She lowers her standards emotionally because disappointment feels more familiar than hope. She stops asking for reassurance, stops expressing needs, stops expecting effort, not because she truly desires less, but because her heart becomes tired of reaching toward people who cannot fully meet her there. And yet, despite all of that, some part of you still refuses to give up completely. That part matters more than you realize. The small voice inside you that still believes in meaningful connection after all the heartbreak you endured is evidence that your soul has not surrendered to bitterness. It may be bruised, it may be weary, but it is still alive, and there is something incredibly sacred about a woman who remains emotionally open in a world that repeatedly taught her to close herself off. I think one of the deepest wounds you carry is the fear that maybe you were never truly unforgettable to the people you loved most. That fear sits quietly inside you during ordinary moments, while folding clothes, while driving alone, while hearing certain songs unexpectedly reopen old emotions you thought you buried years ago. You wonder if anyone ever loved you with the same depth you offered them. You wonder if anyone ever realized how much of yourself you poured into keeping relationships alive. Because women like you rarely love halfway. When you care completely. You remember details. You notice moods. You protect people emotionally even when your own heart is struggling. And because you love this deeply, rejection feels devastating in ways few people fully understand. It is not just about losing someone. It is about questioning whether your love itself was ever enough to make someone stay. But listen to me carefully now. Someone else's inability to hold your heart properly is not proof that your heart lacked value. Read that again, slowly, inside yourself. You were not difficult to love. You were difficult to neglect once truly understood. There is a difference. The tragedy is that many people encounter profound love before they are emotionally mature enough to recognize its rarity. And sensitive women often suffer the consequences of that immaturity. You became the lesson people learned from after they lost you. You became the memory they revisited once they finally understood what genuine emotional safety felt like. But by then, the damage inside you had already formed. By then, you had already spent nights questioning your worth in silence. Still, I need you to remain here with me for this truth, because it may change the way you see yourself forever. Your life is not a collection of failed loves. It is a journey of your soul learning discernment. Every disappointment taught you something essential about the difference between temporary attention and lasting devotion. Every heartbreak refined your understanding of what your heart truly requires in order to feel safe, nourished, and emotionally alive. And maybe now, after all these years of carrying loneliness so privately, you are finally approaching a season where love no longer needs to hurt in order to feel real. Maybe you are finally becoming the version of yourself that no longer confuses emotional struggle with passion. The version that understands peace is not boring, consistency is not weakness, gentle love is not less meaningful than chaotic love. In fact, it may be the very thing your soul has been searching for all along. So, tonight, before you disappear back into your responsibilities and routine, I want you to place your hand gently over your heart and acknowledge how much this woman inside you has survived. She survived abandonment. She survived uncertainty. She survived being overlooked by people who should have cherished her more carefully. And despite everything, she is still capable of love. That is extraordinary. Do not rush past that truth. Sit with it. Honor it. Because one day, someone will meet the depth in you with equal depth, and when that moment arrives, you will finally understand why your heart refused to stop believing. Until then, please remember this. You are not too emotional, too sensitive, or too much to hold. You are simply a rare soul living in a world that often mistakes numbness for strength. But your softness was never your weakness. It was always your light. And even now, after all the silent battles you fought alone, your story is still unfolding beautifully. I'm right here. You are not alone. Come closer again tonight and let yourself soften for a while. I know how difficult that has become for you. Somewhere along the way, life taught you that relaxing emotionally was dangerous, because every time you finally allowed yourself to feel safe, something shifted beneath you. Someone changed. Someone left. Someone stopped choosing you with the same certainty they once promised. So now your heart lives in a constant state of quiet anticipation, always preparing for loss before love has the chance to fully settle inside you. Even during peaceful moments, part of you remains emotionally alert, watching carefully for signs that affection might disappear again. That kind of vigilance is exhausting, and I think you have been exhausted for much longer than anyone realizes. People see your strength, your composure, your ability to continue functioning through pain. But they do not see the invisible fatigue of always having to emotionally protect yourself. They do not see how deeply you crave one moment of complete emotional rest, one relationship where you do not have to question your value every other day. You became so to surviving disappointment that you stopped expecting tenderness to stay. Maybe that is why certain small gestures affect you so deeply now. A sincere conversation, a thoughtful message, someone remembering a detail about your heart instead of only your responsibilities. Those things move you because your soul has gone so long without feeling truly attended to. And I think there were moments when you even felt ashamed for wanting that kind of closeness. You told yourself to stop needing reassurance, to stop hoping for emotional consistency, to become more independent, less vulnerable, less attached. But no matter how much you tried to convince yourself that you did not need deep love, your heart kept longing for it anyway. Because the desire to be emotionally seen is not weakness. It is part of being human. Especially for someone like you, someone whose entire life has been built around giving care outward while quietly starving inward. Do you ever look back and realize how many versions of yourself you became just to keep love from leaving? That realization can break something open inside a woman. You adapted constantly. You became easier, quieter, more understanding, more forgiving than your own wounds allowed. You overlooked things that hurt you because you feared losing connection more than losing yourself. And eventually, you started abandoning your own emotional truth in order to preserve relationships that were already failing to nourish you properly. That is one of the deepest forms of loneliness a person can experience. Betraying your own needs just to remain loved. The tragedy is that many women do this so gradually they barely notice it happening. They wake up one day emotionally depleted, staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, wondering why they feel invisible, even inside relationships that technically still exist. I think you know that feeling intimately, the feeling of lying beside someone while emotionally mourning the absence of closeness that used to live there. There is something painful about being a deeply feeling woman in a world that rewards emotional detachment. You were taught to admire people who appeared unaffected, mysterious, emotionally unavailable. Meanwhile, your heart naturally moved toward sincerity, depth, connection, devotion. You wanted conversations that lingered long after midnight. You wanted emotional safety, not performance. You wanted to feel chosen repeatedly, not just pursued temporarily. But too often, you encountered people who loved attention more than intimacy. People who enjoyed being adored but did not know how to care for the fragile inner world of another human being. And because your heart was genuine, you kept trying harder. You believed more patience would fix confusion. More understanding would create consistency. More love would eventually inspire someone to meet you at your depth. But love cannot heal someone who benefits from remaining emotionally unavailable. That lesson cost you years of your life. I think there were nights when you questioned yourself so harshly that you forgot how extraordinary your heart actually is. You asked whether you were too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. But the truth is, your sensitivity allowed you to notice beauty others missed. It allowed you to feel music deeply, to recognize sadness behind someone's smile, to care with sincerity in a world full of distraction. You're gonna never smile. Your emotions were never the problem. The problem was that you kept offering your tenderness to people who lacked the emotional capacity to honor it properly. And when that happens repeatedly, a woman begins shrinking herself unconsciously. She stops expressing how deeply she feels because previous experiences taught her vulnerability would either be ignored or mishandled. So she becomes quiet-tighter, more guarded, more hesitant to believe affection when it finally appears again. Yet even now, after everything your heart has endured, there is still warmth inside you. That amazes me, truly. People's experience far less pain and still become cold toward the world. But you never fully lost your softness. Wounded? Yes. Tired? Absolutely. But not hardened beyond love. Somewhere inside you, there is still a woman who wants to sit beside someone and feel emotionally safe enough to exhale completely. A woman who wants ordinary moments to feel sacred, can feel sacred. Drinking coffee in silence beside someone who understands her. Falling asleep without anxiety twisting through her chest. Hearing her name spoken with tenderness instead of obligation. These desires are not unrealistic fantasies. They are human needs your heart has postponed for too long. Wait with me here for a moment, because I need you to hear this clearly. Your loneliness did not happen because you were unworthy of love. It happened because you kept trying to build emotional homes inside people who were still emotionally homeless themselves. People cannot offer stable love when they have never learned how to stay present with their own hearts. And unfortunately, sensitive women often become caretakers for emotionally wounded people because empathy makes them hopeful. You saw potential where others saw warning signs. You stayed longer because you understood pain deeply. You forgave because you knew what it meant to struggle internally. But eventually, compassion without reciprocity becomes self-abandonment. And I think your soul is finally growing tired of abandoning itself for temporary connection. Maybe this is the season where you begin returning to yourself. Not the guarded version shaped entirely by disappointment, but the original woman underneath all the heartbreak. The woman who still believes love should feel safe. The woman who still longs for emotional honesty. The woman who deserves to stop apologizing for having needs, because your needs are not excessive. Wanting consistencies is not excessive. Wanting tenderness is not excessive. Wanting to feel emotionally prioritized by someone who claims to love you is not excessive. These are healthy desires your heart has every right to hold. I know part of you fears becoming hopeful again because hope feels dangerous after repeated disappointment. But hopelessness is not protection. It is only prolonged loneliness disguised as safety. Your heart was not created to merely survive life. It was created to experience connection, intimacy, warmth, and belonging. And even though you have not fully received those things yet in the way you deserved, your story is not finished. There are still conversations you have not experienced, moments of tenderness, waiting for you, people capable of loving you with the depth you once thought only existed inside your imagination. Do not let your past convince you that meaningful love belongs only to other people. Your soul is not forgotten. Your tenderness is not wasted. Your capacity to love deeply is not a curse. It is evidence of how profoundly alive you still are beneath all the pain. Tonight, stop viewing your life through the eyes of people who lack the emotional maturity to truly see you. You are more than the heartbreak you survived, more than the nights you cried quietly into pillows nobody else touched, more than the relationships that slowly taught you to doubt your own beauty emotionally. Still time for softness in your life. Still time for a genuine connection. Still time for peace. And one day, when someone finally loves you with consistency instead of confusion, you will realize how much of your suffering came from trying to earn what should have been freely given all along. Until then, please still stay gentle with yourself. Your heart has carried enough alone. I'm right here. You are not alone. Your story is still being written. Stay here with me a little longer, because I think this is the moment where something inside you begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, like the first hint of morning light entering a dark room after a very long night. You have spent so many years carrying emotional pain as though it were simply part of your identity, that you almost forgot what it feels like to imagine another way of living. Somewhere along the road, survival became more familiar to you than peace. You became used to disappointment arriving disguised as love, used to giving more than you received, used to convincing yourself that being emotionally exhausted was normal. But I need you to understand something tonight that may take time for your heart to fully believe. You were never created merely to endure life. You were created to experience warmth, reciprocity, emotional softness, and emotional rest. And the fact that you have not fully received those things yet does not mean they were never meant for you. I know there were moments when loneliness made you question your own value. Moments when silence, after giving your heart to someone, felt unbearable. Moments when you stared at your phone, wondering why affection always seemed temporary in your life. Those experiences left marks on you. Even now, there are still days when old wounds quietly reopen without warning. A memory, a familiar song, an empty evening that reminds you how long you have been emotionally carrying yourself. And because you became so accustomed to disappointment, part of you started expecting it everywhere. You stopped fully trusting beautiful moments because you feared they would disappear. You learned how to emotionally prepare for loss before love even had the chance to settle into your life. That is what heartbreak does when it repeats itself too many times. It teaches the nervous system to anticipate abandonment instead of safety. But wait with me here for a moment, because there is something important I want you to hear. And healing is not becoming someone who never feels pain again. Healing is finally realizing that your pain was never proof of your unworthiness. For too long, you interpreted rejection as evidence that something about you needed to be smaller, quieter, easier to love. But the truth is, your depth simply required someone emotionally mature enough to meet it. And many people were not. That was never your failure. Some souls recognize rare love only after they lose it. Some people do not understand emotional presence because they have spent their entire lives disconnected from themselves. You tried to build intimacy with people who feared vulnerability, and then you blamed yourself when the connection could not survive. But love cannot deepen where emotional honesty is absent. I think your heart is beginning to understand that now. Slowly, painfully, but honestly. You are starting to realize that chasing love drained you. Because real love was never supposed to feel like constant uncertainty. Real love does not leave you questioning your value every night. It does not force you to beg for consistency. It does not make you feel emotionally invisible while standing right beside someone. Love should feel like relief, not confusion. Peace, not maybe for the first time in your life, you are beginning to crave calm more than intensity. That is growth. That is your soul becoming wiser through everything it survived. Do you know what I admire most about you? Even after all the disappointment, your heart still carries tenderness inside it. You still notice beauty. You still care deeply. You still long for meaningful connection instead of becoming numb. That is extraordinary because many people allow pain to turn them cold. but you kept your humanity. You kept your softness, even while protecting it more carefully now. And I think there is a quiet strength in that which few people truly understand. Softness after suffering is not weakness. It is courage in its purest form. There were years when you believed your life was passing below you by emotionally. You watched others build relationships, families, futures, while secretly wondering if deep love would ever truly arrive for you. Sometimes that fear still whispers to you late at night. The fear that maybe you missed your chance. Maybe you are too damaged now. Maybe love belongs to younger versions of people, untouched by heartbreak and disappointment. But that fear is lying to you. Love is not reserved for those who have never been hurt. In fact, some of the most meaningful love arrives after a person has finally learned their own worth. After they stop accepting breadcrumbs, after they stop abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. And I believe you are approaching that place now. You are becoming a woman who no longer measures her value by who stayed or left. A woman who understands that her tenderness is precious, not disposable. A woman who finally sees how much emotional labor she carried for others without receiving the same care in return. That awareness may feel painful at first because it forces you to grieve all the ways you settled for less than your heart deserved. But it is also freeing. Because once you truly understand your worth, you stop begging to be chosen by people incapable of recognizing it. And perhaps that is the real transformation happening inside you now. You are no longer trying to convince yourself that bare minimum affection is enough. Your soul is tired of surviving on inconsistency. You want depth now, presence, emotional honesty. You want someone who stays gentle with your heart, even during difficult moments. Someone who understands that the strongest women still need reassurance, too. Someone who chooses you clearly instead of ambiguously. And believe me when I tell you, that kind of love exists. Not perfect love, because no human being is perfect, but sincere love, grounded love. Love that feels safe enough for your nervous system to finally rest tonight. I want you to stop apologizing for still wanting that kind of connection. Stop telling yourself you should be stronger, less emotional, less hopeful. Your hope is not embarrassing. It is evidence that your soul still believes life can offer more than what you have experienced so far. And I think it can. I truly do. One day, you will look back on this lonely season differently. Not as proof that you were forgotten, but as the time your heart slowly learned how to return home to itself. Until then, please be patient with your healing. You have carried invisible grief for years. Recovery from that kind of loneliness takes tenderness, not pressure. I'm right here. You are not alone. Your story is still being written. Stay with me tonight because I feel something inside you, Sal, not Saidutsin, not weakness, not surrendered. In the painful way you once understood it, but it's a different kind of surrender. The kind that happens when a woman finally grows tired of fighting herself. For so long, you carried the belief that you had to earn love by overextending your heart, by proving your loyalty, by being endlessly understanding, even when your own needs were quietly breaking beneath the surface. You became the safe place for everyone else, while secretly wondering where your own safe place was. And after years of giving more than you received, something inside you became emotionally exhausted. Not because you stopped believing in love completely, but because you stopped believing love would ever arrive in a way that felt peaceful. You learned how to survive attention that disappeared, affection that changed without warning, promises that slowly dissolved into silence. And over time, your heart adapted to disappointment the way people adapt to cold weather. You learned to function inside emotional winters. But I think your soul is beginning to crave something different now. Not intensity, not emotional chaos disguised as passion. Relationships where you've constantly analyzed word, every and gesture, just trying to figure out whether you are still valued. I think what you want now is calm. A love that does not force your nervous system into constant uncertainty. A connection where your heart no longer feels like it has to audition for reassurance. And do you know what is beautiful about that realization? It means you are healing, truly healing, because emotionally wounded people often confuse instability with excitement. They chase what hurts because unpredictability feels familiar. But the wiser your heart becomes, the more it starts recognizing peace as the deeper form of intimacy. There were years when you believed longing itself was proof of love. You thought if someone occupied your thoughts constantly, if their absence physically ached inside your chest, then what you felt must be profound. Now you are slowly understanding that Anxiety is not devotion. Confusion is not connection. And having to beg for emotional clarity is not romance. Real love does not thrive on uncertainty. Real love allows your spirit to unclench. It creates space inside your body where fear used to live. And maybe that is why your heart has become more selective now. You are no longer impressed by words alone. You have learned that consistency reveals truth more clearly than promises ever could. I know there are still moments when loneliness visits you unexpectedly. Perhaps in the quiet hours of evening, when the world slows down and memories grow louder. Perhaps while looking at old photographs and realizing how many versions of yourself you had to become just to survive emotionally. You remember the woman who kept hoping people would finally love her in the language she understood best. The woman who waited patiently for effort to match her devotion. The woman who blamed herself every time someone failed to stay emotionally present. And if I could sit beside that version of you now, I would tell her something gently. You were never difficult to love. You were simply waiting in rooms filled with people who had not yet learned how to love deeply themselves. That truth matters because I think you spent far too many years internalizing the emotional limitations of others. Every inconsistency became a reflection of your worth. Every withdrawal made you question your beauty emotionally. Every ending convinced you to shrink your expectations further, but your soul was never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people for something they lacked the capacity to give, and there is freedom in finally understanding that. Freedom in realizing you no longer need to exhaust yourself, trying to earn what should flow naturally between two emotionally available hearts. Wait with me here for a moment, because there is something I want you to notice about yourself now. You are softer towards your own pain than you used to be. Years ago, you judged yourself harshly for hurting. You criticized your sensitivity. But now, slowly, compassion is beginning to replace shame inside you. You are starting to see your heart not as broken, but as tired. Not weak, but overburdened. And that shift changes everything. Because healing truly begins the moment a woman stops treating her own wounds like inconveniences and starts honoring them as evidence of how deeply she has loved. I think your life is entering a quieter kind of transformation now. Not the dramatic kind people post about or celebrate publicly, but the sacred inner kind. The kind where you finally stop chasing people who only offer partial presence. The kind where solitude begins feeling less like rejection and more like protection. The kind where your relationship with yourself becomes so honest that you can no longer tolerate connections built on inconsistency. This is not loneliness anymore. This is discernment. This is your spirit learning the difference between being alone and being emotionally abandoned. And believe me, there is a profound difference between those two things. One day, someone will meet you in this softer, wiser version of yourself. Not the version that overextends to be chosen, but the version that understands her own value deeply. And when that love arrives, it will not feel like emotional chaos. It will feel like recognition, like coming home to a place inside yourself you thought had disappeared years ago. You will not have to decode mixed signals or constantly wonder where you stand. You will feel it in the steadiness of their presence, in the gentleness of their attention, in the way your heart gradually stops preparing for abandonment. And perhaps the most beautiful part of all is that by then you will finally understand that love was never supposed to cost you your peace. Tonight, I want you to forgive yourself for all the years you settled for less than your soul deserved. Forgive yourself for the times you stayed too long, hoped too hard, ignored your intuition, because you were afraid of losing connection. You were learning. You were searching for love with the tools you had at the time. There is no shame in that. And despite everything, look at you now. Still capable of tenderness, still capable of hope, still willing to believe that your life can hold more than heartbreak. That resilience inside you is sacred. So, rest tonight knowing this. Your heart is not too damaged for love. Your story did not end in the places where others failed to cherish you properly. There is still beauty ahead of you. Still softness waiting to enter your life. Still moments that will remind you why your soul fought so hard to remain open despite all the pain it carried. Until then, keep choosing yourself gently. Keep honoring the woman inside you who survived so much in silence. I'm right here. You are not alone. Your story is still being written. Come sit with me one last time tonight because I feel the woman inside you beginning to breathe differently now. Not perfectly, not without scars, but with a softer kind of strength than the one you carried before. For so many years, your life felt like an endless attempt to survive emotional storms quietly. You became accustomed to carrying heartbreak with dignity, loneliness with composure, disappointment with silence. You mastered the art of functioning while hurting. Most people never realized how much pain lived underneath your calm exterior because you rarely allowed your suffering to become visible. You kept moving forward even when your heart felt unbearably heavy. You kept showing kindness even when you secretly longed for someone to notice how tired you were. And perhaps that has always been the most remarkable thing about you. Despite everything life placed on your shoulders, you never completely abandoned your ability to love. I think there were times when you feared your tenderness would eventually disappear forever. After enough heartbreak, enough emotional inconsistency, enough nights spent crying quietly beside people who no longer truly saw you. Part of you worried that your spirit would harden beyond repair. You wondered if one day you would wake up emotionally numb like so many others seem to be. But that day never fully came, did it? Even after all the disappointment, there is still warmth inside you, still longing, still hope that maybe somewhere ahead of you exists the kind of connection your soul has always searched for. And I want you to know how beautiful that is. Not naive, not foolish, beautiful. Because in a world where so many people become detached in order to avoid pain, you continued choosing humanity. You continued believing that love should feel meaningful, that emotional presence matters, that tenderness is still sacred. Do you realize how much healing has already happened inside you? Not because the pain vanished, but because your relationship with yourself began changing. You no longer blame yourself for every wound other people created. You no longer believe your worth depends on who stayed or left. Slowly, you are beginning to understand that your value was never determined by another person's ability to recognize it. And that realization changes everything. Because once a woman truly sees her own depth clearly, she stops begging for crumbs from emotionally unavailable people. She stops shrinking herself to fit into relationships that require self-abandonment. She begins protecting her peace instead of just sacrificing it for temporary affection. That does not mean you stopped wanting love. It simply means You finally understand the kind of love your soul deserves. You want honesty now, presence, stability. You want someone whose actions allow your nervous system to rest, instead of constantly preparing for disappointment. And perhaps most importantly, you want to feel emotionally safe enough to fully yourself again. To fully yourself again. No masks, no overthinking, no performing strength. Every moment of the day. Just truth. Just connection. Just the quiet relief of finally being loved in a way that feels nourishing instead of exhausting. Wait with me here for a moment, because there is something important I need you to remember moving forward. Your loneliness was never proof that you were unlovable. Sometimes deeply feeling people spend years alone because superficial connections cannot satisfy their hearts. You were never meant for shallow, shallow love. That is why inconsistency wounded you so deeply. That is why emotional distance always felt unbearable. Your soul has always longed for something genuine, something rooted in emotional intimacy rather than convenience. And although that longing caused you pain at times, it also protected you from becoming someone who settles permanently for less than real connection. I know there are still moments when fear visits you quietly. Fear that maybe time has passed too quickly. Fear that perhaps your deepest love story already slipped away unnoticed. Your heart carries too much history now, too many scars, too much disappointment. But listen to me carefully tonight. Your scars do not make you less worthy of love. They make you more human, more compassionate, more capable of understanding tenderness when it finally arrives. The right person will not be frightened by your depth. They will recognize themselves inside it. They will understand why your heart became careful. They will see the resilience beneath your softness and treat it gently instead of taking it for granted. And perhaps that's what this entire journey has truly been about. Not teaching you to stop loving, but teaching you to stop abandoning yourself while searching for love. Teaching you that your needs matter too, that your emotions deserve care too, that you should never again have to earn basic tenderness by sacrificing your own peace. So, because love never supposed to feel like constant emotional hunger. Real love nourishes, it steadies, it creates warmth in places that once carried loneliness. I think the woman you are becoming now understands this in a deeper way than ever before. She still feels deeply, but she no longer confuses suffering with devotion. She no longer mistakes inconsistency for passion. She trusts herself more. She listens to her intuition instead of silencing it. And slowly, she is learning that being alone is far less painful than remaining in spaces where her heart feels unseen. That wisdom came at a cost, but it also became part of your liberation. So tonight, I want you to forgive yourself completely for all the years you spent searching for love in people who could not fully hold it. Forgive yourself for every time you ignored your own loneliness just to keep someone else comfortable. Forgive yourself for every moment you questioned your worth because another person lacked the emotional maturity to cherish you properly. None of those experiences diminished your value. If anything, they revealed the extraordinary capacity your heart has for resilience and empathy and hope. And now, after everything you survived, here you are. Still standing, still open, still becoming. There is something profoundly moving about that. The woman who once cried herself to sleep, wondering whether she would ever truly be chosen, is slowly learning that she must choose herself first, not selfishly, but lovingly, gently, fully. Because when a woman finally stops abandoning herself, she begins attracting relationships that no longer require her to. Love will arrive in a way that feels quieter than you expected, but deeper than anything you have known before. It will not demand that you prove your worth repeatedly. It will meet you calmly, honestly, consistently. And when that moment comes, you will finally understand why your soul fought so hard to remain soft through every season of loneliness. Until then, keep honoring your heart. Keep speaking kindly to yourself during difficult nights. Keep believing that your story still contains beauty you have not yet seen. I'm right here. You are not alone. And your story, beautiful woman, is still being written. Yes, strictly with 1350 words in paragraph style, not in cinematic line style. Chapter 6. Stay with me a little longer tonight because there is still something your heart needs to hear before this journey ends. I know you have spent so much of your life carrying yourself through invisible battles that sometimes you forget how extraordinary it is that you are still here emotionally open at all. There were seasons when loneliness wrapped itself around your spirit so tightly that even ordinary days felt heavy. You smiled through conversations while privately feeling disconnected from the world around you. You learned how to continue functioning while grief quietly lived inside your chest. And perhaps the most painful part was how few people truly noticed. They saw your strength, and assumed strength meant you were untouched by pain. But strength often grows in people who had no choice except to survive what should have broken them. That was your story for a long time. You survived heartbreaks that changed the way you viewed yourself. You survived emotional absences that taught you to question your worth. You survived loving people who accepted your devotion while failing to fully cherish the woman offering it. And through all of it, you kept going. I think there were nights when you looked around your life and wondered why love always seemed easier for everyone else. You questioned whether something about you made lasting connection impossible. Maybe you blamed yourself for feeling too deeply, for needing reassurance, for longing for emotional intimacy in a world that often celebrates emotional distance instead. But what if your depth was never the problem? What if your heart simply refused to settle for shallow experiences pretending to be love? Sensitive women often suffer because they can sense the difference between genuine presence and temporary attention. They feel when affection lacks sincerity. They notice emotional withdrawal long before words confirm it. And because they feel everything so intensely, they also carry disappointment, murmur,